Hello, I'm Rachel Matthews from Successful Garden Design, and I've been a professional international garden designer for over 30 years now. And for the last 15 years, I've been teaching garden design online to homeowners. In this series, we're going to cover how you design a gorgeous garden from start to finish. In this first segment, we're going to look at the foundational level, the most important and overlooked things. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make with their garden is not to have an overall plan of how it's going to look. The vast majority of people tend to think they can make their garden look gorgeous if they buy enough plants and features. Unfortunately, that really isn't the answer. And the reason that doesn't work is a good design layout interlinks and it works as a whole. So if you work on individual parts of it, you'll never get an overall coherent design. And why is that important? Well, think of it like this. Would you employ a builder to come and build your house without an architect's plan? Just supply him with a pile of bricks and let him get on with it? No, probably not. Well, you might, but would you expect good results? What are the chances of the sizes of the rooms and the layout and the flow and the windows and the light all being in the right place? But yet when it comes to gardens, people do exactly that. They just grab the materials and then off they go. And then they wonder why they haven't got good results, even though they might have spent thousands. And I have witnessed this many times, unfortunately, throughout my career, when people have had a go at designing gardens themselves, failed miserably having spent thousands, and then call me in to rectify it. So let's look at where you start, the base plan. It's really critical to get your garden on paper to scale. Now, the reason you do that is because a good design interlinks. It's a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle. So you've got to make sure everything fits and is in the right size and in the right place. So as boring as it may sound, the garden survey is the most important place to start. Now, before I went to college, when I was 19, I designed my first garden for my brave parents. And I'd read one whole book on garden design. And yes, the designer had mentioned how important it was to measure, but well, that sounded boring, so I couldn't be bothered. And yes, let's just say I've learnt the hard way. Measuring really is very important. Now, you need to measure more than just the boundary line because you need to be able to pinpoint exactly where the corners are. Because if you think of an empty box, if you move it from one side to another, the measurements of the box hasn't changed, but you can make it almost into a diamond shape just by moving the sides. So therefore, if you have done that with your measurements, you've only measured around the outside edge of your garden, you don't know if the boundary lines are at an angle or not to the property. And you can't always tell just by looking out your house window if the boundary is off to a bit of an angle. But then when you come to build it, those angles, even if they're quite small, can play a part in how the garden looks. So therefore, it's very important to, if you can, measure diagonally across the garden as well as the outside measurements. And this enables you to make sure the corners are in the right place. The next part of the foundational level is to draw up the plan to scale. And this is important for several reasons, not just because you want the design to fit, but also if you have a scale plan to work from, you can measure and work out how many materials to order so you don't end up with far too many or not enough. Now, a very simple scale is 1 to 100, and that basically means that every centimetre on the paper is equivalent to 100 centimetres on the ground. So 1 centimetre equals 1 metre, in other words. But the scale I like to use the most is 1 to 50. So every centimetre is 50 centimetres on the ground. Or to put it another way, every 2 centimetres on the drawing is a metre on the ground. Now, a metric scale is much easier to work on because you can use a regular ruler or you can buy a scale rule where they have the scales already worked out. Now, the third and final part of the foundational level of garden design is the dreaming and scheming phase. And for this, it's a really good idea to look at as many garden images and photos as you can. So websites like Houzz and Pinterest can be really valuable to give you an idea of the style of garden that you want to achieve. Now, for those of you doing my courses at Successful Garden Design, I've created something called the Garden Style Wizard that walks you through and gives you lots of pictures to choose from, and then it scores you at the end to see whether your tastes are modern, traditional, rustic, natural, that type of thing. So you get a really good sense of what your tastes are before you start. Now, don't overlook this phase of looking at lots of garden pictures for inspiration, because especially if you've never designed a garden before, because what this does is putting lots of pictures in your mind is it starts to get your creativity and your imagination flowing. It's a bit like if you're trying to cook a meal and you open your kitchen cupboards and they're completely bare, you can't really cook. So if you can put as many things in your mental kitchen cupboard when it comes to gardens, then you'll have lots of ideas that you can choose from. Now, you don't necessarily, in fact, it's preferable if you don't cram every last one of your ideas into your garden, but it's good to have a well-stocked cupboard so that you've got lots of inspiration to draw from. So it's well worth putting the time into this preparatory foundational level, getting your garden measured, getting that survey onto a base plan to scale, and then really getting the creative juices flowing and working out what you want. Because so few people do these really important things. And when you look at the vast majority of gardens, how many of them look good? How many of your neighbours do you peek over their fence and go, oh wow, that's an amazing garden? Very few, isn't it? Which is quite disappointing, because the average garden can and should be so much more than average. So in the next segment, I'll show you exactly how I do it with a very counterintuitive system that makes garden design much, much simpler. And we'll look at how to avoid the number one mistake that virtually everyone makes with their garden. But if you can't wait until then head on over to successfulgardendesigner.com/free-classes and you can attend one of my free garden design workshops. So until next time, take care.